In this video, we will be introducing carbohydrates and talking about their roles within the body. So by the end of it, you'll be able to really tell me what a carbohydrate is, as well as differentiate between the simple and complex carbohydrates. You will have some idea of the structure. You won't need to know too much of the detail, but you will have an idea of what a carbohydrate looks like, as well as be able to identify different sources, describe the function it is in the body, tell me how many calories it's giving you, and finally we'll look at how blood sugar is actually regulated in the body. So carbohydrates are simply compounds that are composed of a single sugar or of sugars that are put together. Now a sugar is a molecule that is made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen predominantly in a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. Now this isn't always true, and it changes as you start combining them together and modifying the sugars in multiple ways, but the basic building block of a sugar is going to be these chemical elements put together in the ratio that we just talked about. Now we're going to look at complex versus simple carbohydrates. Complex carbohydrates are going to be the ones that are bigger, such as your starches, your fibers, whereas the simple carbohydrates are going to be your sugars. So two main types of simple sugars are monosaccharides and disaccharides. So the monosaccharides that are important for nutrition include glucose, galactose, and fructose. Now glucose and fructose you do find free in nature. Glucose is predominantly going to be the sugar that is running in your body, but it's also, when you consume sugars, the glucose molecule is also going to be part of that, as well as the fructose. Galactose, on the other hand, is typically only found in nature naturally as a part of a disaccharide. And so that's the other type of simple sugars, are the disaccharides. So if we look at these three monomeric units, so the monosaccharides, we can put together them in multiple ways, and these are the ways that they're commonly found in nature. So if you take a glucose molecule and add a fructose to it, you end up with sucrose. So this is the table sugar that you most commonly think of when you are consuming sugar. Maltose, so malt extract, and really some of the sugars as they get broken down, the starches as they get broken down will form maltose. So this is two glucose units put together. And then lactose, the milk sugar, is going to be the glucose unit, and this is really where the galactose comes into play, is as part of the lactose molecule. Now, you may have heard of high fructose corn syrup. High fructose corn syrup is called high fructose corn syrup because it has a higher amount of fructose than regular corn syrup. So regular corn syrup is mostly going to be made up of glucose and maltose and other glucose units put together, whereas high fructose corn syrup, you're taking some of the glucose and converting it to fructose. So when you look at high fructose corn syrup, it's basically looking at a sucrose molecule that's broken in half, because the glucose and the fructose are about even in those. So the places where you find the sugars, you find them in your fruits, you can find them in vegetables and other foods to differing degrees. They're highly concentrated in added sugar, so you can find them in honey, find them in syrups, table sugar, as I mentioned. Agave nectar is actually predominantly a fructose syrup. So they come in a lot of different forms, mostly as syrups or the added sugars. You find them in a lot of your juices as well. Now the complex carbohydrates are going to be polysaccharides. So these are saccharide or molecules where you have many sugar units, and here we're looking at glucose still, that are connected together. Some of the main ones are starch. So with starch, you have two main types. You have amylopectin and amylose. Amylopectin it simply has branches in it, so you have all of these connected together in this way, but every now and then you have a carbon molecule that's going to be connected to another carbon molecule branching off in a different way, and so you have branches with the amylopectin. Amylose, on the other hand, are just straight chains of the amylose. So when you look at starchy foods, such as your whole grains, your refined grains, your potatoes, this is what the starch molecules look like in those. Now, another type of complex carbohydrate is glycogen. So this is the storage form in humans and animals. It's similar to starch, so you have the same types of connections branching them out, and you will have these branches. However, it's more similar to the amylopectin than it is the amylose, in that you have the branches, but the glycogen is actually even more branched than this. So you may be thinking, okay, so maybe this is a good source that since this is stored in muscle cells in the liver, it'd be a good source of carbohydrate. Well, in all actuality, the glycogen breaks down fairly rapidly when you're processing the meat, meaning the animal dies, it's going to break down. So you're not, and get converted into other things. So you're not really getting a large amount of carbohydrate when you're consuming any form of meat. The only animal products that really give significant amount of meat that are commonly consumed are going to be, or of carbohydrate that are, the only animal products that are giving a significant amount of carbohydrate are going to be your dairy products, at least as far as those that are consumed by most people. Now, there are other complex carbohydrates such as cellulose. Cellulose may look a lot like the amylose, but it's actually connected in a different way, even though it is a straight chain. And how it's connected is unique, such that the enzymes in our body actually can't break this molecule apart, so you end up with it not being digested. So you end up with the cellulose being contained, and that's essentially what is a fiber. So fiber falls into the category of complex carbohydrates. The fibers really are defined in a number, or differentiated in a number of ways. So they're either non-digestible or hard to digest carbohydrates that our bodies can't do. There's two types, the soluble fiber and the insoluble fiber, also known as the viscous and the non-viscous fiber. You do get some of these depending on the foods you eat, will contribute differing amounts of this. So the soluble fiber includes the inulin, the pectin, the coreogen, while the insoluble fiber is your cellulose, the lignin, the chitin, xanthan gum, and some of the resistant starches. So it's actually a starch, but it's hard to digest. So it functions more like a fiber than just the starch that you can break down. Chitin is actually going to be what makes up the exoskeleton of crustaceans, fungi, and of insects. So for the most part, not too much of a dietary concern, although if you eat insects on the whole, or where you're actually probably getting some of this would be when you're eating like mushrooms or other fungi that actually use this to make their cell walls. Sources, so the soluble fiber, these comes from the legumes, from many fruits, root vegetables, broccoli, and other vegetables, as well as flaxseed. Whereas you're getting more insoluble fibers from whole grains, nuts and seeds, green beans, as well as the skins of fruits and vegetables, which you may recognize as tough and stringy things, whereas these are gummy and adding more thickness. These are typically fermentable. These can be fermented, but not as well. So when we say fermentable, we're essentially talking about the microorganisms that can break them down into gases. So here, these are going to be the ones that can be broken down and will produce some gas, while these can be, but they're less so than the other ones. These kind of have contrasting activities as far as how it moves stuff through the digestive system. So this actually slows the movement through the GI tract, while this increases its movement. This will also increase the fecal weight. This is going to slow the movement, and this helps by also slowing glucose absorption, helps to soften the stools. Because it slows it, and increases satiety or feeling of fullness. It can also lower cholesterol by binding the bile. Bile is actually going to be made from cholesterol, so if you're binding the bile so that it can't be reabsorbed, you're taking some of the cholesterol out, so your body needs to use more of the cholesterol to replace it. Benefits of the fiber, so soluble fiber and insoluble fiber are both thought to reduce the risk of colon cancer. The soluble fiber is thought to help also with reducing the risk of heart disease and lowering the risk of diabetes, and because it increases satiety, is also thought to help with weight management. This helps reduce constipation, and also causes or reduce your risk of other things that are related to digestive health, such as diverticulitis, hemorrhoids, and appendicitis, which we'll talk about in more detail when we get to the chapter on the human body and the digestive system. So functions of carbohydrates in the body and in the foods. Obviously, carbohydrates provide flavor. They're the sweet tasting things. The Maillard reactions, the browning reactions that are considered good, those involve carbohydrates. They add texture and viscosity and gel formation, so your jellies are going to be made from this. High amounts of it can act as a preservative. They can also be fermented to make bread, rise, the carbon dioxide that comes off that is from the fermentation of carbohydrates, as well as making beer, yogurt, etc. So a wide variety of fermentation roles. In the body, it actually acts as our primary energy source, or our preferred energy source, especially for the brain. We'll talk about this more when we get to fats, because fats are going to have an interesting role in energy usage as well. But these are also stored in the body. It's not stored as much as fats are, but it is stored to a larger degree in the liver, and somewhat in your individual muscle cells as well. They can act as building materials for making other things, for amino acids, for example. They can actually mark cells, so you may be familiar with the ABO blood types. The markers of these are actually modified carbohydrates, so that's actually what's acting as the marker, and why you can't donate blood across blood types that are not compatible. And then they also play a role in fermentation, especially in our colon and small intestine, where it's actually thought to play a role in health, and this is really an expanding area of research as we go into it. Now, carbohydrate recommendations. Few Americans are consuming enough fiber, so it's recommended that most Americans get more fiber. The amounts are 38 grams per day for men and 25 grams per day for women, up until the age of 50, and then if you're 51 or older, it's actually a little bit lower. You need 30 grams per day for men and 21 grams per day for women. Most Americans also should reduce their intake of refined carbohydrates, so this is going to be your processed flour, your added sugars, and those sort of things, but then they need to increase their intake of fruits, vegetables, and whole grains. Most Americans also need to reduce their intake of added sugars. According to American Heart Association, men should keep this under 150 calories per day, whereas women need to have it at less than 100 calories per day. Now, if you recall, carbohydrates contain 4 calories per gram, so of having added sugars in your diet, less than 100 calories per day, would mean that you are having less than 25 grams of carbohydrate of added sugars per day. Now, other people have a less stringent rule. So the American Heart Association says this is the ideal, but realize that for many people it's not going to actually be achieved. The USDA actually says that after you've gotten your main carbohydrates in, added sugars can provide more discretionary calories. So you can be, if you're more active, you can add more sugars to your diet. According to the USDA, so it's a less stringent policy. Recall the DRI suggests, as far as the AMDR, the distribution of carbohydrates should account for 45 to 65% of calories. And this means that you should consume at least a minimum of 130 calories per gram, or 130 grams of carbohydrates per day. And this is a lot of these recommendations. We're going to look at this in relationship to fats, and so later on we will be talking about low carbohydrate and low fat diets and how they're going to be doing different things and what the results of those kinds of diets are. Now, the sugars that you take in, so if you're consuming a lot of carbohydrate-rich foods, this can lead to an elevation of blood glucose. Elevated blood glucose can be damaging in a number of ways that we don't fully understand, but we do know that high levels of glucose in the blood are toxic to our cells in a number of ways and can lead to things like diabetes and other problems that are associated with that. So your body tries to regulate the blood glucose levels to keep it from getting too high. So if your blood glucose levels go too high, your pancreas is actually going to sense this, and when it senses that they're too high, it sends out insulin, and insulin is going to have a variety of different functions throughout the body. So with muscle cells and with liver cells, they're going to help take up the glucose and actually store the glucose for later use. In fat, they're actually going to take up the glucose as well, and it's going to assist in the conversion of the glucose to fat. So all of this is going to work together because you're taking the glucose out of commission to reduce the blood sugar levels back to normal so that it's not toxic. Conversely, if your blood glucose levels drop because you've been fasting or something, your body is going to try and prevent this because it's such an important fuel, especially for your brain. You can't let blood glucose levels drop too much, so it's going to, again, be sensed by the pancreas. The main thing the pancreas is going to make now is glucagon. So the pancreas makes glucagon when glucose is gone. So glucagon, glucose is gone. So when it's gone, you're going to want to replenish it. So glucagon functions mainly in the liver, since this is the primary source of where we're storing glucose, and liver is more of a sharer than the muscle cells. The muscle cells are greedy and use the glucose just for them. The liver's, sort of like the bank that will send it out as you need it. So glucagon signals for the liver to release the glucose, and so this increases blood sugar level so that it doesn't drop too low.